Callum Reyes had not eaten a proper meal since Wednesday, and still when he saw the man's canvas bag split along the bottom seam on the steps outside Gore Park, Farmers Market, the first thing Callum did was run across the wet pavement and drop to his knees beside the scattered apples. Nobody else stopped. It was a Saturday afternoon in January in Hamilton, Ontario, and the people walking past had their chins buried in their scarves and their hands jammed in their pockets, and they moved past the problem the way people move past something that is not theirs to solve. But Callum Reyes, 9 years old, and wearing a jacket 2 sizes too small because his real jacket was back in Edmonton, where his father was, did not think about the cold or his empty stomach, or the fact that he was supposed to be at the library 3 blocks away. He just picked up the apples. The man who owned them was perhaps 60, maybe a little older, with silver-gray hair cut close and neat and a long charcoal overcoat that had the particular quality of being both expensive and, clearly, very old. He was sniffing a slight list to his left, his weight favoring his right leg, and his face had the expression of a person who has just been betrayed by something they trusted. He had a paper coffee cup in one hand, from a small independent place on James Street North, the kind that costs $4 more and tastes worth it. And now the bag that had been holding his market purchases was lying flat on the wet stone step, its seam opened clean along the bottom. An orange had rolled to the base of the steps. A small paper packet of aged cheddar had landed on its edge. 3 apples were scattered across the pavement, and a 4th had come to rest against the boot of a man in a business suit who had not noticed and was already walking away. Callum gathered the apples first, then the cheese, then chased down the orange. The man with the coffee watched him. He did not say anything at first. He just watched the way a person watches something they were not expecting and have not yet decided what to make of. "Your bag's gone," Callum said, standing up with his arms full. He stated it the way his father stated things. Not unkindly, just directly, because in their house things were called what they were. "The bottom's right out. You can't carry it." "No," the man said. His voice was quiet and dry, like the sound of a floor settling in an old house. "I can see that. I can hold them for you, if you're going somewhere close so they don't fall again." The man looked at him. It was a proper look, not the quick, distracted glance adults gave children when they were occupied. He looked at the boy's face, the careful, serious eyes, the jacket too short in the sleeves, the grocery items held against his chest with both arms, the way you carry something you have been told matters. He looked at the orange, which Callum had tucked under his chin to keep it from dropping. "I'm parked on King Street," the man said slowly. "About 4 blocks. "That's okay," Callum said. "I don't mind walking." The man considered this for a moment. "All right," he said at last. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a fold of the ruined bag and laid it over the items in Callum's arms to keep the wind off them. 4 blocks, thank you." "Sure," Callum said. They walked. The man's name was Malcolm Firth. He was 62 years old, and he was the senior partner at one of the oldest law firms in Hamilton, a firm that bore his name first on the letterhead, and whose clients included 3 of the largest manufacturing operations in the region, a major hospital network, and a sitting member of provincial parliament who called Malcolm on his personal line when things got complicated. Malcolm had been written about in the Hamilton Spectator more times than he cared to count, had been asked to speak at Osgoode Hall twice, and had quietly declined a 3rd invitation because he had never learned to enjoy the sound of his own voice amplified. He had spent 40 years building something from almost nothing. He had learned in the doing of it to walk quietly and carry his own things. He did not tell the boy any of this. Callum did not ask. He was concentrating on the apples, on keeping the cheese from sliding, on matching the older man's pace, which was steady but careful, the limp more visible now that they were moving. He watched the pavement ahead the way you watch a path you are not entirely sure of. After the 2nd block, the man spoke. "What's your name?" "Callum. Callum Reyes." "Callum." The man turned the name over once without hurrying it. "Good name." "My dad picked it." Callum's voice was even. "He said it means something about a dove. I looked it up once. It's from the Latin." Malcolm glanced sideways at the boy. "You looked it up?" "At the library. I go there most days after school." A pause. "It's warm." Malcolm noted those last 2 words. "Not I like reading. Not there are good books there. It's warm." He stored the information the way he stored case details, quietly, without drawing attention to the act of noticing. "And your father," Malcolm said, after another half a block. "He chose well." "He's in Edmonton right now," Callum said. He said it the way a child says a fact he has practiced saying without making a face about it. "Looking for work. The plant closed here in September. He's been out there since October." "I see," Malcolm said. He did not say "I'm sorry," which Callum had heard 30 times since September and which had never once helped. He let the fact sit between them on the sidewalk, unremarked upon, which was somehow more respectful. "Who are you staying with?" Malcolm asked. "My mum," Callum said. "She does cleaning, morning shift at the Delta and then evenings at the office building on James. She's usually gone before I get up and back after I'm asleep." A pause. "She leaves food in the fridge. It's fine." Malcolm heard what the boy said. He also heard what the boy did not say, which was the part a good lawyer always listened for. He thought about the jacket. He thought about the word fine. "And today is Saturday," Malcolm said. "Yeah, a small beat. The library's closed Saturdays at 4. I was just walking around." It was 20 past 5. They turned onto King Street. The wind came off the escarpment and found every gap in Callum's too small jacket, and he pressed the groceries tighter against his chest, without deciding to, the way a person holds something warm. Halfway down the block, Callum saw the car. It was long and dark, parked at the curb beside a low brick building, and a man in a dark coat was standing beside it with his hands at his sides, watching the street. The man was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with a steady face and a watchful stillness about him that belonged to someone who was very good at waiting. Callum's steps slowed without him deciding to slow them. He had grown up in a neighborhood where a long, dark car waiting at the curb was not always a neutral thing. His body remembered this even when his mind was still catching up. "That's just Colin," Malcolm said without looking at the boy but clearly having noticed the hesitation. "He drives for me, has done for about 15 years. He's a good man. He won't bother you." "Okay," Callum said, but his arms had tightened around the groceries. Colin saw them coming from down the block. He straightened slightly, but he did not move toward them or gesture any kind of hurry. He had worked for Malcolm Firth long enough to understand that his employer arrived back at the car in his own time, and occasionally with company that had not been arranged for in advance. When he saw the boy, the short jacket, the careful arms full of market goods, Colin's expression did not change in any obvious way, but something in his eyes adjusted, the way a decent man's eyes adjust when he understands a situation before he has been told about it. "This is Callum Reyes," Malcolm said when they reached the car. "He kept my groceries from rolling into the street." Colin extended a hand to the boy with complete seriousness. "Mr. Reyes, much appreciated." Callum did not know what to do with being called Mr. Reyes. He was 9 years old, and the most formal anyone had ever been with him was the school secretary, who used his full name when she called him to the office. Mr. Reyes was a name that belonged to someone older and more certain of their place in the world. It landed in his chest like a coin dropped into still water. Small, but the ripples went outward for a long time. He shook Colin's hand. "Thanks," he said, "sir." Colin took the groceries from Callum's arms gently, the way you receive something that has been carefully transported and deserves to arrive intact. The orange, which had ridden under Callum's chin for 4 cold blocks, was finally at rest. Malcolm reached into the inside pocket of his coat, and Callum felt his stomach tighten slightly. He had imagined, somewhere in the back of his mind during the walk, that there would be money at the end of it. He had even let himself want it, a little, in the quiet, involuntary way that hunger makes you want things. And now that the moment was arriving, he found, to his own confusion, that he did not want it to happen that way. This man had spoken to him like a person. He did not want the afternoon to collapse into something it had not been. He took a small step back. "I didn't do it for anything," Callum said. His voice came out steadier than he expected. The bag was broken. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Malcolm's hand stopped inside his coat. He looked at the boy for a moment that was longer than a moment. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, but the shape that a smile leaves behind when it has passed through without quite showing itself. He withdrew his hand. In it was a business card, plain white, printed on heavy stock. "I know you didn't," he said. "I was reaching for this." He held the card out between 2 fingers. Callum took it. The card read in plain black letters, "Malcolm Firth. Firth and Associates." Below that, a phone number. Nothing else. No title. No flourish. "That number goes to a woman named Alice who has worked with me for 27 years, Malcolm said. "If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need someone to call, you ring that number. You say, 'This is Callum and I met Mr. Firth on King Street.' Alice will know what to do. You don't need to explain anything else." Callum looked at the card. He turned it over. The back was blank. He did not know that the name Malcolm Firth was on a building 2 blocks away. He did not know that Malcolm's firm had argued cases before the Ontario Court of Appeal, that Malcolm had been offered a judgeship at 54 and turned it down because he preferred to stand beside his clients rather than sit above them. He only knew that the man had given him something to hold and that it felt important. He tucked the card carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket, the pocket closest to his chest, the same pocket where he kept the photograph his father had sent from Edmonton. Just a picture taken on a job site, his dad squinting into the sun, holding up a hard hat. Proof of being somewhere, proof of coming back. "Thank you, sir," Callum said. Malcolm and Colin exchanged a look above the boy's head. It was the kind of look that needed no words because both men already knew what was being said. Colin gave the faintest nod. "Callum," Malcolm said. He spoke to the boy the same way he had spoken to him the entire walk, not down at him, not with the soft, over-careful voice adults used when they were being kind in a way that let the child know they were being pitied, directly, as one person to another. "I am going for supper in about half an hour. There's a small restaurant on Lock Street that belongs to a woman I've known for 20 years. Nothing fancy. But the food is very good, and the place is warm, and I would be glad of the company. You're not obligated. Colin can take you wherever you'd like to go if you'd prefer that. I only want to ask." Callum stood on the sidewalk on King Street with the January wind finding every gap in his jacket and his stomach reminding him in no uncertain terms what the word supper meant. He thought about the library being closed. He thought about the apartment where the fridge had half a container of leftover rice and bread going stale. He thought about his mother who would not be home until after 10. He thought about his father who had told him once, in the car on the way back from a hockey game the winter before the plant closed, "The thing about this family, Cal, is we don't make people feel small. We just don't do that." And Callum had nodded without entirely knowing what his father meant. He thought he was beginning to understand it now, standing in front of a man who had not once made him feel small. "Yes, sir," Callum said. "I'd like that, thank you." Colin opened the rear door of the car, and warm air came out into the cold street, and Callum climbed in. The seat was deep and wide. The leather was the color of old wood and warm to the touch. There was a quiet hum of heat running somewhere beneath the floor. He sat very still with his hands in his lap and tried not to take up more space than he was given. Malcolm settled in beside him with the careful movements of a man whose knee had not forgiven him in 3 years, and Colin closed the door and pulled out into the Saturday evening traffic on King Street. The drive took 12 minutes. Callum watched through the window as the city moved past in a way it never did from a bus. Unhurried, the gray buildings patient in the early dark, the strip of shops and restaurants beginning to light up against the January evening. Malcolm did not ask him to perform conversation. He spoke now and then about small, undemanding things. The condition of the roads after a week of freeze and thaw, a particular record he'd been listening to in the car lately that Colin had described, without hesitation, as embarrassing. He spoke the way a person speaks when they want a room to feel inhabited without requiring anyone to fill it. The restaurant on Lock Street was called Brennan's Table. Its front window was steamed lightly from the warmth inside. A small chalkboard on the pavement listed the evening specials in handwriting that made no effort to be decorative. The woman who came out from the kitchen when the door opened was perhaps 65, with short white hair and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead and a blue apron over a wool sweater. When she saw Malcolm, she made a sound of real pleasure and crossed the small room with her hand already out. "Malcolm, you haven't been in 3 weeks. I know, Rosemary, the Henderson case kept me. The Henderson case can answer for itself when it shows up hungry on a Saturday." She said it firmly. But she was already smiling. Then she turned and looked at Callum, and her face did not rearrange itself into the careful expression adults sometimes assembled when they saw a child who looked the way Callum looked. She simply looked at him, directly and warmly, and said, "And who's this?" "Callum Reyes," Malcolm said. "He kept my groceries together on King Street." "Did he?" Rosemary looked at Callum with something that was not quite assessment and not quite affection, but was close to both. "A person who keeps things from falling apart is always welcome at this table. I'm Rosemary. Do you like soup?" "Yes, ma'am," Callum said. "Good. I made far too much, and it needs someone to help me with it." She led them to a table near the back, where the heat from the kitchen came through the wall in a steady, generous way, and the light was amber and low, and the table was set with plain white plates and heavy cutlery. Callum sat. The chair was solid under him. A basket of bread arrived within moments, brought by a young woman in an apron who set it down with a quiet smile and did not make anything of anything. Malcolm tore a piece of bread for himself and pushed the basket to the middle of the table. "Eat as much as you like," he said. "Rosemary keeps bringing it as long as there's someone to bring it to." Callum reached for a piece of bread. His hand was trembling slightly. The fine, involuntary trembling of a body that has been holding itself very still for a long time and is finally given permission to stop. He tore the bread carefully and put a piece in his mouth and chewed slowly and looked at the white tablecloth and did not look up. Malcolm did not watch him eat. He turned his face toward the far wall, toward a shelf of old cookbooks and framed photographs of people who had eaten at this table over the years, and he talked about small things. A construction project making a mess of the intersection at Dundurn, Maine, the quality of the winter apples at the market this year compared to last. A Gordon Lightfoot record Colin had been suffering through in the car. He spoke the way you leave a radio on for someone who is recovering from something difficult. Just sound, just company. No demand to it. Rosemary brought soup, a beef barley, deep and dark and smelling of everything a Canadian January evening ought to smell like. She brought more bread without being asked. She brought a glass of milk for Callum and black coffee for Malcolm, and she asked neither of them anything that required explaining. Halfway through the bowl, Callum set his spoon down. He had eaten more in the past 20 minutes than he had eaten in 2 days, and his stomach was having a small argument with itself about the sudden change. He folded his hands on the table. He looked across the white cloth at Malcolm. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. He meant it as a real question, not a challenge. Malcolm set his coffee cup down. He was quiet for a moment, in the particular way he was always quiet before he said something he had actually thought about. "When I was about your age," Malcolm said, "I was living in Sudbury. My father worked at the Falconbridge operation. When I was 11, there was a slowdown and then a labor dispute, and then my father was laid off, and in Sudbury in 1974 that meant the bottom fell out of everything. My mother took in ironing. We moved to a smaller place. There were weeks that were very tight." He picked up his coffee cup and set it down again, a small, precise motion that seemed to help him think. "One January. I must have been 12. I was walking home from school in the dark. There was an ice storm coming in off the lake. I slipped on a patch outside a government building on Elm Street and went down hard and dropped everything I was carrying. My school bag, my books, a bag of groceries my mother had sent me to pick up on the way home." He paused. "I was on my knees on the ice trying to collect things, and there was a man coming out of the building who stopped. Older man in a good coat. He helped me up. He helped me gather everything, and then he asked how far I was going." Malcolm looked at Callum steadily, the way he looked at things he wanted to see clearly. "His name was Emmett Hoare. He was a retired judge. He drove me home that evening in his car, which was warm, and before I got out he shook my hand and said, 'I remember this exactly,' he said. 'Don't let the ice win, son.' That was all." Malcolm's mouth moved slightly at the corner. "He came for supper at our house 2 weeks later. He came most months for the next 4 years. When I applied to law school, he wrote the letter that got me through the door. When I needed the application fee and had no way to cover it, he paid it without my knowing until after the acceptance came." Callum was very still. "I asked him once why he bothered with us," Malcolm said. "He said, 'Because someone helped me up off the ice a long time ago, and I do not want to be the place where that stops.'" He picked up his coffee and held it without drinking from it. "You did for me today on those market steps what I did for Judge Hoare on Elm Street in 1974. In the cold, when no one else was stopping, when you had nothing to gain from it. So, I am doing what he did for me, because I do not want to be the place where it stops either." Callum looked at the white tablecloth for a long time. The story had found something in him that did not yet have a name for itself. He thought about his father on a job site in Edmonton, squinting into the western sun. He thought about his mother running a vacuum through hotel corridors before the city was awake. He thought about the jacket that was too short at the arms, which he wore every day without complaint, because complaining about a jacket his parents could not afford to replace was something he was not willing to do to them. He thought about a retired judge on an icy street in Sudbury in 1974 who had stopped when nobody else did, and how that single stopping had moved through time like a sound through water until it arrived. 50 years later, on a wet January afternoon in Hamilton, in the form of a man who noticed when a bag broke. "I don't know how to say thank you for this," Callum said. His voice was very quiet. "You already did," Malcolm said, "on King Street." Rosemary brought butter tarts for dessert, a particular kind of Canadian sweetness that required no apology and no explanation. Malcolm ate one slowly and Callum ate two, and the small restaurant filled gently around them with the quiet warmth of other people's Saturday evenings. When the meal was over, Rosemary walked them to the door. She bent slightly toward Callum and said, "You come back anytime. You tell whoever's here that Rosemary is expecting you, and there will always be something on the stove." "Thank you, ma'am," Callum said. "I will." Outside, the night had gone fully dark and cold. Colin was at the curb. Malcolm stopped on the sidewalk before getting in and turned to Callum one last time. There is one more thing I want to ask, and I want you to know you can say no. He looked at the boy carefully. Alice has been in touch while we were eating. She's located a woman on Barton Street, 5 minutes from your apartment, who is home tonight, and very happy to have you for the evening. Colin will take you there now and make sure you're settled, and Alice will ring your mother at work, so she knows exactly where you are and is not worried. Everything waits on what your mother says. If she says yes, that's the arrangement. If she says no, Colin takes you straight home. Callum stood on Lock Street and looked up at Malcolm Firth in the lamplight, silver-haired, coat dark against the January night, weight on his right leg, patient blue eyes waiting for nothing except an honest answer. He thought about the card in his inside pocket. He thought about the photograph of his father beside it. He thought about a retired judge in Sudbury who had said, "Don't let the ice win, son." "Okay," Callum said. "Yes, sir, thank you." That was the beginning of it. The story did not end that Saturday evening, because stories that matter rarely do. It continued through that winter and into spring. Malcolm's firm, quietly, without announcement, connected Callum's father to a manufacturing client in Hamilton that was expanding its operation, and by March his father was back in the city and working. Callum returned to his own school, his own room, his own family, and the quiet crisis that had been building at the back of everything slowly stood down. He kept the business card in the top drawer of his desk. He kept the photograph of his father beside it. He kept going to Brennan's table on Lock Street, first with his parents, then on his own as he got older, because Rosemary had meant what she said. Malcolm practiced law until he was 70, and then he didn't, and the years after that he spent walking the escarpment trails in the mornings and reading in the afternoons and occasionally phoning old clients he thought might need to hear from someone who still remembered what they had built. He attended Callum's high school graduation as just a guest of the family, sitting near the back, and did not make a production of being there. He did not see Callum called to the bar because he died the winter before, at home in his apartment on the mountain, with Colin beside him, and something that might have been Lightfoot on the radios. But Alice called Callum the same morning, and that was how Malcolm would have wanted it. In Malcolm's papers, there was a note addressed to Callum. It was short. It said, 3 things. Your father picked a name worth carrying. You picked up my apples when no one else stopped, and Judge Hoare told me once not to let the ice win, so don't pass it on. Callum Reyes is 38 years old now. He practices civil law in Hamilton and takes pro bono cases on Wednesday afternoons, and every January he walks down King Street past the market and thinks about a broken canvas bag and a cold afternoon and an old man who never once made him feel small. His firm runs a fund for young people from working families who want to study law but cannot cover the application fees. He named it the Hoare Fund after a retired judge in Sudbury who stopped on an icy street in 1974 and set something in motion that is still moving. He has told the story of Malcolm Firth and the broken bag exactly twice. Once to his daughter when she was old enough to understand it, and once to a first-year class at the law school that asked him why he had gone into this work at all. Both times, he said the same thing his father had said in a car after a hockey game, the winter before everything got hard. You don't make people feel small. You just don't do that. Not ever. Both times, the room went very quiet.